Are you an autistic individual or the parent of an autistic individual? Do you feel frustrated and even discouraged because you haven't been able to find your place in the body of Christ? Well, today's Weekend Connection program is just for you.
This can't happen. These stories can't happen anymore. This is not consistent with the way that God wants to tell His story through our church.
I'm Gregory, and let's get connected. April is National Autism Awareness Month. Over 3.5 million families in the United States are impacted by autism spectrum disorder, and many of those who raise children who have this disorder are Christians. Unfortunately, some of these parents don't feel comfortable attending church meetings or find that their local church isn't equipped to include their children. Today on Weekend Connection, we'll examine the responsibility and the joy that we Christians can have to welcome these families, and we'll also take a look at the resources available to help make that a reality. Joining me today is Barbara Newman. She is the Director of Church Services and a teacher consultant with the Christian Learning Center Network in Michigan. And Barbara, we welcome you to our broadcast today.
Thank you, and thank you for highlighting this topic. It's an important one.
Well, we're glad to be able to do that with you. And we would like to begin by giving our listeners a better understanding of autism spectrum disorder. What exactly does that refer to?
I think it's helpful to understand autism spectrum disorder as the differences that you might notice in an individual who has autism spectrum disorder. It's actually a difference in brain development, in neurological development, and so you would notice basically 6 different things. Many times there's a difference in social understanding, and so you may have an individual who has difficulty reading social cues or understanding exactly what's the best move to make in a social setting, and so that creates some uniqueness, especially in places like a church where it's highly social and there are lots of people. So how do you act when you walk into a room, and when is the conversation beginning and when is it over, and how do you read body language? All of that makes up that social piece. Sometimes there's a language difference, and in some individuals with autism, very common story is, this child began speaking but then lost that ability by about 18 months or so, and spoken words didn't ever really return. So that person might communicate with pictures or with gestures or signs. And another difference that might look, again, it's language-based, is you may have an individual who speaks very well, has an incredible vocabulary, but sometimes it's understanding multiple meaning words, and that person might be very literal. So you say, it's raining cats and dogs, and that person is going to run to a window to see what that might look like. That becomes especially interesting in a church setting because we use phrases that we never even think of. I remember working with an individual who was so afraid to go back to church because somebody had asked if they wanted to give their heart to Jesus. And so this person had a very different picture of what that meant in terms of cutting their heart out. And so there are sometimes those language differences that can create unique and different understanding. And another area of difference could be just sort of this repetitive theme or behavior. It could be that an individual moves in a certain way. It can also be that they have a very focused interest in cars or trains or World War II or the dates presidents were in office. It could be just a whole host of differences that in topics that might be fascinating for an individual that bring great amounts of joy. So you can have a social difference, a language difference, would be some kind of a repetitive theme or behavior. And then, just briefly, the way the sensory system takes in information might be wired a little differently. And so a sound that might not be loud for you might be very loud for an individual. A touch that might not be hard for you might be very hard for an individual. And so one or more of the senses are wired just a little bit differently. And it could be wired so that that person is sensitive to that sound or touch or smell, or it could be that that person is craving that sound or touch or smell. And so it could depend totally on the individual about how that sensory system is wired just a little bit differently. And the other thing that can happen is sometimes to determine the perspective of another person. What might that person be thinking or feeling? That can be a really challenging area as well for an individual on the autism spectrum. So you've got a person who's trying to figure out, okay, is it a person that's she happy with me? Is she sad with me? How might she be feeling? And so that can be tricky to read somebody else's perspective. And so that can be an interesting area of difference as well. So those are some of the differences that we might notice in an individual, and some of the relationship that could have to a church setting.
Well, you have certainly shared with us a wide range of behavioral characteristics of individuals that have autism, and some of those would understandably be seen as distractions in a conventional church service. Is it your belief that people with ASD can be successfully included in local church activities?
Absolutely. As director of the Church Services Division for CLC Network, we spend a lot of time just helping churches better understand and make room to be that welcoming place for persons of varied abilities. And I think the sixth area of difference that I sort of saved for this question would be just a desire for routine and sameness. Don't like the schedule to change. And quite honestly, I look at a typical worship service and many things that our churches offer, and so often they're embedded with these rich traditions and routines and patterns, and that can often be a huge gift for a person on the autism spectrum. It's a great match to know that there's sort of a predictable bulletin and set of events that's going to happen. And so many times we look at that and we say, let's really not focus so much on autism, but let's get to know Sally, or let's get to know Joe, let's get to know Maria, and find out, what does this person love to do, and what's difficult for this person, and how can we use this person's gifts while still providing areas of support for needs. So we had one person, for example, who really, it rocked their world to hear a loud sound. And so they would get into the worship service, and boy, that music would start, and that person was out the door because it was too loud. And we discovered that unexpected noise was very difficult for this person. But if we could have this person predict when the sound was going to start, it was much easier. So this church had those lovely nursery numbers. You know, if it's 42 and that's your child, you should go, and because your child's having a rough time in nursery. And what we did was to simply assign to this person a nursery number. And every time they saw their number go up there, they knew they had about 10 seconds before the music was going to start. And so this person could prepare for that noise, and all of a sudden, it worked. They could stay in that worship service. We've had some people, because of that need to sort of know the pattern and the routine and what's going to happen, we've had some come into the Sunday school room when it's empty, and into a worship service place where they're meeting, and just experience that place when there are no people there. They could practice finding a spot, reserve a seat, be in that place. We suggest that churches can even put information on their website that people can visit to go on and see what's going to happen in a traditional worship service. What might I expect? So if people can preview that, many times works well. So we've just discovered that there are so many things that you can do, strategies to try, that allow that individual to be comfortable in that setting. And a big part of it, since social differences are high on the list, is many times we have to spend time informing and equipping the congregation as a whole, whether those are children, whether those are adults. They make up part of that social equation as well. And so if we can equip everybody to understand, this is what might happen. I have a great example of this. I was in a church service, and all of a sudden there was a pretty loud noise from the back as the pastor was preaching. Stop! No, don't! And everybody turned around to see what was going on, and without missing a beat, smile on his face, the pastor said, "Oh, I've been looking forward to introducing you to a new family that started to come here. You probably heard their daughter, Marie, and her parents gave me information or permission to tell you that Marie loves this church, loves the music, loves to be part of this, loves to shake people's hands. You probably noticed that. But sometimes noises can bother her, and it might be a noise we hear or a noise we don't even hear. So her parents know what to do. Today I'm counting her as my cheering section. She happens to have autism," and he went right on with a message. So that took very little time. But about 5 minutes later, she did the same thing. And can you imagine how many people turned around? zero, because they had the information that they needed to process what was going on. So
That's good.
think it's important to make plans for an individual, but also sometimes you need to make plans for a congregation. And autism awareness and awareness of persons who are part of that community can be really powerful.
Well, Barbara, explain for us what the average family is experiencing when they attend a church service and they have not had the opportunity to see the church prepared. What are they experiencing with their autistic family member?
Well, I will tell you there is a huge range of stories that I've heard across the country and by email, and some of them are pretty gruesome. There have been many individuals, be that an adult or families, that have been asked to leave, try the church down the road, we don't have anything for you here, literally have been escorted out because the church just doesn't know how to receive that person. And the family, if they've experienced that too many times, often says, well, it's probably not a place for us. Maybe we need to stay home on a Sunday morning. And unfortunately, I've talked to many individuals, too, who, if they hear it long enough, hear the voice of the church as the voice of God and figure there's not a place for me in that family. That's tragic, because we certainly know that's not God's message to his children, that God is a welcoming God and a God who draws people to himself, and we want to be able to model that. So there are some churches, however, who have done a phenomenal job of saying, you know what, we're not going to wait for that family to walk through the door. We're going to expect, because this is 1 in 68, folks. I mean, this is a lot of people we're talking about. We're going to expect that we might have a person with autism or Down syndrome or a person in a wheelchair. We're going to get ready in advance. And so there are many churches now who are just sort of figuring, look, if 20% of the population has some kind of a disability, we might as well get on board here and get ready for that. And so autism spectrum disorder being part of that, there are churches who are doing a better job of maybe having some buddies equipped, of having a registration form heading into children's ministries on a Sunday morning that says, hey, does your child have any unique gifts and unique needs that you'd like us to know about? And then they can put together a plan. And so as churches sort of begin and say, we're expecting this, or even a note in the bulletin, we're so glad you're here, we welcome persons of varied abilities, let us know if there are ways that we can come around you to make this a better experience. And, sometimes, and I think families get this, you have a family member with autism, sometimes it isn't going to be the first visit that's successful. I often say to families, be fair, give that church a heads up. But I think, there are many churches that have come to the notion that we just need to be prepared.
Barbara, we've covered quite a bit of information today, and unfortunately, we have run out of time. Before we go, can you share with us some resources for churches or people who would like to minister to autistic individuals or families that have an autistic family member?
Absolutely. And I happen to have written a book called Autism in Your Church. And quite honestly, that's a really great place to start, to get some basic information about strategies and ideas and things to have in place, tools and techniques. And I know I can speak for the Christian Learning Center. If you have any questions or even want to brainstorm about a particular individual, you can just give us a call, and we have people who will call you back and just brainstorm about ideas that you can try.
And if someone wanted to contact the Christian Learning Center Network, how would they go about doing that?
To go to the website is probably easiest at clcnetwork.org, or the phone number is 616-245-8388.
Once again, the website address is clcnetwork.org, and the phone number is 616-245-8388, and we'll keep that contact information on file for our listeners here at BBN. We've been talking with Barbara Newman. She is the Director of Church Services and a teacher consultant with the Christian Learning Center Network in Michigan. And Barbara, if you don't mind, I'd love to have you come back next week and talk in more detail about steps that churches can take to move towards ministering to families affected by autism spectrum disorder.
I would love to do that. Thank you for the opportunity, and hope and pray that equipping congregations would open doors for many families and individuals.
Well, we look forward to what you have to share along those lines next week. That's our broadcast, and we do invite you to join us again next week for Weekend Connection at 4:02 Eastern here at the Bible Broadcasting Network.